What's up, folks? Welcome to another episode of the 10 Horse Monty YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing a winter series this whole winter where I talk about the different tips and techniques that I like to fish throughout the winter time. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Please subscribe, hit the bell notification. That way when I drop any content, you'll be the first to know. I also like to remind you guys that I'm dropping videos on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I also do a live stream with Backyard Bassin Mondays at 7 p.m. It's a fun time. I'd like to invite you guys to join us. So let's get to the video. Hey guys, welcome to the first video in the winter series. Today we're going to talk about Alabama rigs. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different rigs that I use, some baits, the tackle, and just things like that. But let's start off by saying make sure you check your local state regulations. Each state has a little bit different view on the Alabama rig. Missouri, they allow 3 hooks. Illinois allows 2 hooks, but there are a few lakes in Illinois that allow the 5-hook rig, and those are, let's see, Rend, Shelbyville, Lake of Egypt, Kincaid, I've got them written down over here, Carlisle, and you can also fish in Smithland Pool, which is the Ohio River. I think you can fish in the Mississippi River with a 5 rig, but anyway, that's kind of sketchy too because it depends on which side of the river you're on, so just check your local regulations so you're good to go out there on the water. Let's start off by talking about the tackle. Any rod that's like a heavy action rod in the 7.4 to, I guess you could go up to 7.11 if you're throwing like a heavy rig. But I'm typically using, I got 2 rigs that I use. One's a 7.4 heavy, that's the G-Force rod by Quantum. And then the other one that I've been using a lot is the 7'6". It's a Lew's Custom Light. And the model number is the LCLF RH. It's a 7'6" heavy power rod, and I just bought this rod a couple months ago, and I've been using it for punching and for frogs, and went out on Lake of Egypt the other day and tied this A-rig on there, and it performed pretty good. Now you want a rod that's kind of light because this is, you know, this technique is hard on your shoulders, so that's why I'm saying you don't need something that's really heavy, like an extra heavy. I'm usually throwing the A-rig on, you know, 1/8 ounce jig heads. So the rigs probably weigh, I don't know, it probably weighs about 1.5 ounces, something like that. So you don't need too big of a rod to do that. As far as the reel, I like a 6.4 to 7.1, you know, kind of a medium range to faster gear ratio reel. You know, honestly, I use a 7.1 a lot because it applies to so many different techniques, and if you need to slow it down, you just got to be mindful, and you can just force yourself to slow down. But I like to have that speed in there too, you know. It's nice to have options. And I'm throwing this on 50-pound braid. You can also use, you know, 20-pound, 25-pound fluorocarbon, but I don't know. It's kind of controversial, you know, as far as what people feel comfortable with. I've been in the boat with guys where, well, did a video last year where we're throwing A-rigs, and I was throwing 20-pound fluoro, and my buddy Jerry was throwing the 50-pound braid, and he was getting more bites than I was with the braid. And this was on a bluebird sky, you know, not a lot of wind, and I was kind of concerned about them seeing the braid. So I don't think it matters. You got all these wires on here and stuff. Honestly, I don't think it matters, but, you know, I'm definitely not a professional. That's just my opinion on that. So let's talk about some of the rigs that I've used. You know, like I said, I don't do this a whole lot. I typically do it in the winter. There's guys that fish, you know, the A-rig all year long. They get out on the ledges on the Tennessee River, you know, drag these things off of drops and things like that. But I'm just fishing this in the winter, so I've done it enough to have a little bit of idea what to look for. So a good starter umbrella rig is this Flash Mob Junior. These are real common. You can pick them up just about anywhere. They're about, I think they're like 12 bucks. You know, it's a 5-arm rig. It's got blades on it. And it's a pretty durable rig. Every once in a while you're losing an arm on it or something, but for the most part, if you're just getting into this, this is a good one to start out with. If you want to spend a little more money, there's several other bait companies that make much more durable Alabama rigs. Let's see, there's Hog Farmer. I think Shane LaHue has a company. You know, they make all kinds of A-rigs and stuff. But for me, this is working just fine. I have thrown this Strike King. It's the Terminator one, and it has the titanium arms, which are really cool. You know, when you're reeling this thing through the water, if you kind of rip it a little bit, these arms flex, and then it flares back out when you slow it down. And it's got a different look, but the thing I don't like about it is it's kind of hard to cast. This is more compact as far as the spread of the wires, and this thing, you know, spreads out a lot farther. You can see the difference here. This thing catches a lot of wind, and it just doesn't cast as good. You can't get as accurate with the cast. One thing I do like about it is it has this swivel, and that just reminded me that I need to put a swivel on the front of this next time I go out, just to keep that line twist down. So that's that. I'm gonna put this back on the reel here, and when I do that, I'm gonna show you something that I did learn last year, as far as how to store the A-rig on your reel. I use this little thing right here. This is just a wristband. It's like a magnetic wristband. You know, you've all seen them. It just goes around your wrist. You know, my daughter's had this thing. This thing works perfect for the A-rig. So these A-rigs have a long arm. I'm always going to put that long arm on my reel. So I'm just doing this here. And then I will grab all these wires. Let's see if you can see this. I'll grab all these wires and just wrap this wristband around this thing like this. And then you just slide it back a little bit. And there you go. It holds your arms where they're supposed to be. It's real handy. You can also use like a Gatorade bottle. Some people cut the back out of the Gatorade bottle and put a slit in it, slide it down over the line. But this is much more practical, and it takes up a whole lot less space. So let's talk about some baits that I use. You're throwing a swim bait, like a small swim bait, on this A-rig. I've got several that I like to use. The caffeine shad, the swimming caffeine shad, is a really good bait to use. The Rage Swimmer in the 3.25 size is a good bait that I've had success with. You can also use these, the Swim and Fluke, Super Swim and Fluke Junior, works really good. Kitex, of course, 3.8 Kitex, 3.3 Kitech. What else I got? Okay, yeah, these Easy Shiners made by Kitech work really well too. I'll show you one of these. I got a real cool profile. I like that profile a lot. It's a good bait. It's a real soft bait. It's got a lot of tail action even in cold water, which is something you'll find with soft plastics in cold water. They get a lot more stiff. So you got to play around and figure out which swim baits actually work. And then of course here's the Swing Impact 3.5. I use these a lot. I also use the Reaction Innovations Skinny Dipper, the small one. That's a really good bait too. As far as jig heads, I'm typically throwing an 1/8 ounce jig head, the 1/16 to 1/8 ounce jig head, and I'm usually fishing, 2 to 10 feet with this A-rig. If you're going to go deeper with an A-rig, you're going to put 1/4 ounce weights, 1/4 ounce jig heads on those bottom 2 wires, and that'll allow it to get down a lot deeper. And you don't have to buy expensive jig heads. I just use shaky heads, honestly. This is a Big Bite Baits shaky head. They just call this the Finesse Worm jig head. It's a shaky head. That's what I use. You can also get on eBay or some of these online fishing sites and just buy some generic jig heads. I bought a 25 pack of these for not a whole lot. These are just standard unpainted jig heads. And you want a light wire, a light to medium wire, because you're going to be getting hung up on the bottom a lot, and you want to be able to pull that. And back to the braid floral combination thing, the difference between the braid and the floral, that's another reason why I like the braid. It's because you do get hung up with this Alabama rig a lot, and that braid allows you to just pull on your rig. Actually, the best thing to do is when you get hung up is to go up to it and get on the other side of it, but it usually pops off. 9 times out of 10, you can get unhung pretty easy. If it doesn't, you can straighten these wires out on this light wire jig hook with the braid. You can with the floral as well, but you're going to lose a lot more rigs with that, and you got to retie a lot more. So that's another reason why I like the braid. But yeah, just a standard shaky head works great. If you're fishing in a state that only allows 2 or 3 hooks on an Alabama rig, that's okay. You can still fish the 5-arm version of it. You just got to have some dummy baits, and there's a couple ways to rig up the dummy baits. So what you'll want to do is you always want your hooks, your baits that have a hook on the bottom wire. And if you can fish 3, you want to put one on this middle wire. This is a key thing for these fish. This sticks out a little bit further, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But as far as, let's just say that your state allows 2 hooks on the rig. You're going to put your 2 hook baits on the bottom 2 arms, and then you're going to rig up what I call a dummy rig. Now all this is, I'll show you here, this is just a jig head, and I've cut the bend off the hook. And you just insert it in your swim bait, and you put a little touch of super glue on there, and you're going to put those on the 3 remaining arms, the middle and the 2 that are up top, because they a lot of times they come up underneath this, they're following it, and they'll come up from underneath and they'll hit the bottom 2 baits. It's pretty interesting how that works. The other way you can rig up a dummy is with these CPS pins, like a hitchhiker rig, what they call them. I'll show you what these look like real quick. They're just a little centering pin. That's all it is. This part goes on your snap, and then this part goes in your bait. And all you're doing is just putting that centering pin in the middle and just twisting it on there. And then you just attach this to your swivel. But you're just going to rig this up like this. You're just going to put this through here. And there you go. It hangs just like that. This is a dummy bait. Now if I'm fishing in a state that doesn't allow 5 hooks on their A-rig, I'm always going to go with the jig head version of the dummy bait. Because this thing is weighted, obviously, and it makes that Alabama rig run a lot better. The problem you'll have with this hitchhiker is this thing will want to spin on you because it doesn't have the weight to kill it out properly. So I don't use this anymore. I used to, but I'm going with this. This is a whole lot better deal, trust me on that. Let's talk about something else that's really important with the Alabama rig, and that is the retrieve. This is something that it's taken me a while to figure out. What I mean by retrieve is the reel handle, how you're reeling that bait in. You want to make that cast. If you're wanting to fish it along the bottom, let it fall to the bottom and just creep it along the bottom. If you're counting down to suspended fish, count it down to suspended fish and get it going. But I'm usually going to make about 4 or 5 casts to where I can get that rig going and I got a good feel of it. And then I'm going to kind of slow the handle down, and then I'm going to start reeling again. A lot of times I'll just pause it and then start reeling again. And those fish, you'd be amazed, 9 times out of 10, as soon as you slow that down or you pause, they'll hit it. They'll get bit. So they're following it, and as soon as it does something a little bit different, it causes them to react. So you're trying to get a reaction strike out of this. It's real key things. It's a real key thing to learn. If you don't learn anything else from this, just remember that. Next time you're out there and you're not getting bit, play around with that retrieve. Do a lot of pauses. Sometimes I'll even jerk it a little bit. Just give a little jerk on the rod and then start my retrieve. And it's just a reaction bite. It just causes that bait to do something different. It forces those fish to react. I'll leave you with one more thing before I go, and that pertains to this center arm. This arm sticks out a little bit longer than the rest of the arms, and I will always put a different colored bait on that center arm. You see here, this is the center arm. These 4 baits are the same. This one's different. I'm always going to be putting a different color bait on this. Sometimes I'll even put a little bit bigger bait on this. If these are all 3.8s, I might go to like a 4.3. Something that's just a little bit bigger. It gives that fish something to key in on, because you get a lot of bites on this center one. One more thing you can do is just chartreuse the tips of this paddle. That can make a big difference. It's just a little bit of contrast. A little bit of contrast goes a long way. So guys, I hope this video helps you a little bit. It was kind of quick. I just wanted to cover a few basics. There's a lot of other guys out there that did Alabama rig videos, and you know, if you're into this, it's something you want to learn a little more, I suggest, you know, going and checking them out. But I just wanted to give you a little short video on some of the things that I've learned. So appreciate your time, man. Like I said, subscribe, hit the notification bell, thumbs up, all that jazz. And until next time.